Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Cindy Howard, a chiropractic internist and nutritionist, and your host today of the Positively Altered podcast. I have a really interesting question for everybody out there. How much time have you spent for the amount of time you've been on this planet worrying about your self worth and wondering if you're enough? I know I have. And sometimes that's really difficult. And I still work on that even today after multiple decades of therapy and conversations and internal reflection. So, for any of you that are thinking about those types of things, you're in the right spot. So, stay tuned. Take a quick listen to our sponsors because they're super important to me. And then we're going to talk about why we are all enough.
Hello, my name is Heather Lord, and I am the COO of Professional Health Products. Cutting corners is an all too common practice in the dietary supplement industry. When my father founded Professional Health Products, he sourced the cleanest, most biologically active ingredients from around the globe. Today, that commitment remains, which is why the finest healthcare practitioners, like Dr. Cindy, have trusted us for more than 40 years. We oversee the entire process in our manufacturing facility, from sourcing and formulation to manufacturing and labeling. Today, we offer over 300 unique products that can be tailored to the nutritional and homeopathic needs of each individual. Most recently, we launched a proprietary genetic test, allowing our practitioners to get even more dialed in to their patients' health. To learn more about Professional Health Products, please talk to your practitioner or visit our website at phpltd.com.
Today, your life is going to be altered. I'm Dr. Cindy.
Welcome to Infinity. We have worked hard to create an electronic claims website that is simple and user-friendly. This is the public side. You can log into your personal web portal here. This is your dashboard. You can personalize it to your liking here. Our main focus has been to allow you to submit and edit claims as easy as possible. You will find our claims editor and claims processing is simple to use and straightforward. Our quick action bar is where you can find your most important information. Most of these icons will take you directly to the claims the number represents. You can easily view if you have any messages in your inbox of any unread alerts by looking for these blue numbers. To view the rest of our training videos to get the most of your Infinity experience, click this icon. We hope you find this web portal simple and easy to use. Thanks for letting us serve you.
I'm Dr. Cindy. Who wouldn't want to join me for the Positively Altered podcast? Welcome back. I'm so glad you hung tight because this one is super important. I want to welcome you to my guest, Eric Brooker. But let me tell you a little bit about him before he says hello. He has a new book, although I do believe we're celebrating a birthday, so maybe not quite so new, by the title of You Are Enough. How powerful that is going to be today. He is also a partner at the Channel Advisors, a leading technology consulting firm. And guess what? An awesome keynote speaker. So we're going to hear all about his adventures and why he is enough and we are enough. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, so I have to ask, right? Like as a co-author, not co-author, right? But an author, it was really difficult to come up with the title of my book. Where did You Are Enough come from?
Oh, we're going to dig deep right away. So, actually, we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary. My sister-in-law passed away October 27th of 2020, and we were driving back from the funeral about 2 weeks later, and my wife just looked at me. We pulled out of a coffee shop, and she said, "I just wish she knew." And I knew that my wife was talking about her sister, but I had no idea what she was talking about. So I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I just wish Maddie knew that she was enough." And it was literally right then and there. We had the conversation. We had about a 28-hour drive from Phoenix back home to Minnesota, and I just knew right then and there that was it, because that wasn't something that just my sister-in-law struggled with. That's something we all struggle with. We all struggle with this sense of worthiness. We all struggle with imposter syndrome. We all struggle wondering, do we have a right to be in the room? And it all boils down to exactly what my wife said. I wish she knew she was enough.
Amazing. And when you said that, I got chills and almost a little tear in my eye because it resonates so deeply, as you mentioned, for a lot of us, and myself included. Where do you think this starts from, that we're not enough? Is this, we've got to lay on the couch with the therapist and go back to mom and dad? And all joking aside, really, where does this emanate from for those of us that don't feel that way?
Well, I think if you look at my sister-in-law, statistically speaking or scientifically speaking, she was genetically predisposed to alcoholism. So some of this is generations deep. But I would say, as goofy as it is to acknowledge, I think a lot of it's just childhood wounds. It's wanting to impress our parents, wanting to impress our siblings, wanting to make sure that we made our dad proud or made our mom proud. And I think a lot of that is exacerbated as a child of divorce and as a divorced individual myself. I think a lot of it for us as children is exacerbated by the trauma that we experience as kids, right? My dad and my mom got divorced when I was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. And so sometimes my mom was there, sometimes my dad was there. They didn't get along exactly all that well when I was a kid, although they get along really well now. I definitely struggled as a kid wondering, "Oh, is this enough for my dad? Is this enough for my mom?" And so I think a lot of it is just stuff from our childhood that goes unaddressed into adulthood.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I wonder, and I'd love to ask you your opinion. How important is it for us to check in that way, even as the person who doesn't feel enough, right? So to ask our partners, our parents, our children, how are we doing, right? Are we letting you down? Is there something that we can do better for you? How important is that?
Well, so I'll go to a statistic that stuck really, really difficult with me when I heard this as I was writing my book. The average parent looks their kids in the eye 30 seconds a day. So the reality is, for most of us, we've got this in our hand. We're asking our kids, "Hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Are you feeling okay?" Meanwhile, while I'm listening to the response, or maybe pretending to listen to the response, I'm scrolling, I'm sending the email, I'm updating Instagram. So, yes, I think it's important that we check in with our kids, that we checked in with our loved ones and see how they're doing. But we've got to be present for the response. We've got to make sure that we've got their undivided attention as well when we're asking. And for that matter, that goes for anybody, the barista at a coffee shop, the woman bagging our groceries at a big box store. We've got to be present to hear that response and to genuinely get the response, like to have them feel like, okay, Eric's paying attention, Cindy's paying attention. I'm going to be real and authentic with them.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As busy as I am, my kids have actually learned to say, "Hey, mom, I need to ask you a question. Can you stop what you're doing?" Right? So that there isn't that concept of multitasking, which we all know we really can't do, right? We
Correct.
think we can do it, we really can't. And so that they can get, and I can acknowledge that they want my focus for those moments, however long they would be. And they've actually learned to ask me for it, which has been very helpful. Because as a busy, also divorced single parent, sometimes you are doing multiple things, in the span of an hour that need attention, or you think they need attention, and others get neglected. Yeah.
Yeah, and
What's
it's interesting. I think there's, sorry, I think there's things that we do that we often forget have an impact on those around us. You know that I've been packing up the house over the last couple of weeks. House went on the market Friday morning, and we've seen some behavioral issues from one of our younger kids. And I am convinced, having now parented for almost 24 years, that those behavioral issues are tied to the fact we have not been terribly present over the last couple of weeks. as we've been packing the house, as we've been gearing up to move. There's a lot of change. We just dropped off our 18-year-old son in college. There's things are moving out of the house. Our son doesn't know exactly what's going on, but things are different. And we've got to be present to those and acknowledge those.
So let's talk a little bit about the guilt that goes along with that. How does that play a role in then for those of us that are parents or leaders or whatever that role is in almost forgiving ourselves, right? For those moments that aren't so stellar.
So I think I'm not one that lingers. I'm definitely one that fails. I'm definitely one that recognizes that I have missed the opportunity with someone that works for me, with a coworker, with a colleague, with a loved one, with a child. But I believe that we do the best, generally speaking, we do the best that we can with the tools that we have in the moment that we have them. I heard something just a couple of weeks ago, and I wish I remembered who said it because I would absolutely give them credit for it. But he said to me, Eric, if given the opportunity to go back and raise my kids all over again, I'd make different mistakes the second time. So it wasn't an acknowledgement of like, hey, I would do things different, but the tools I'm equipped with today are different than what they were 24 years ago, and I'd make different mistakes. And so the reality of it is when we acknowledge our failures, when we acknowledge that we weren't present, when we acknowledge that we were supposed to show up for the t-ball game or the cheerleading thing or whatever, we need to acknowledge it internally, externalize it, meaning, and I think there's something really powerful about asking for forgiveness, not just of our coworkers or our significant other, but also our kids. Hey, I failed you. Please forgive me. And then making a concerted effort to not let it happen again. We're all destined to fail, but we need to acknowledge it and move forward and be better because of it.
You know, it's interesting. I talk a lot, what's really important to me, I talk a lot about the power of words and the power that we give certain words in our lives. And failure, I think, is a really interesting word because I've always looked at failure as an opportunity, right? And we've heard that before 100 times. And you look at all of these crazy, wildly successful people, and on the outside, they look, oh, came easy, right? They just elevated and did great. But when you dive into their history, there's actually some pretty significant failures that occurred that led them on that path of success. And I wonder how we could continue to teach people that the words that we give power to, we have to choose the type of power we give, right? So do you have any suggestions or thoughts or recommendations on that word of failure or mistake and how we in our own head can look at those as opportunities rather than something so negative that most of us fall into?
Well, I think two keynote speakers, authors, both of whom I've had on my podcast, a guy by the name of Ryan Leake wrote a book called Chasing Failure, which is a phenomenal book for a variety of different reasons. But the general thesis is no different than my buddy Jake Brown, who talks about failing forward. We're all going to fail. We're going to fail in business. We're going to fail in relationships. We're going to fail at work. We're going to fail. But the real failure is not learning from it. And we may learn from it and make the same mistake over again, but we need to acknowledge it. I'm not a big journal person, but I am one that is very reflective. So taking some time in for me in silence and just reflecting, okay, that definitely didn't go the way I planned it, whether it be a business that I started or a relationship or whatever. Here's a great example. Many years ago, I hired an individual on the backs of a really great resume and a couple of recommendations. And he flew out to Minnesota for training. And within the first 90 minutes, I realized he was the wrong guy. And not one of those like, oh, we'll make it work. It'll be fine. It was not the right role. It was disrespectful for him to keep him in the role. It was just a bad decision. So at the end of the week, we parted ways, and we are in relationship today. Now, almost 10 years later, but it was because we had a candid conversation. I asked him for forgiveness. I failed him, but I've not made the mistake since because I learned from now. Listen, I've hired some of the wrong people, but I've not hired people the same way in which I hired him because I learned from that. And I think that's really what we're called to do is learn from our failures and be better because of them.
So, for those of us that get stuck in the same rut, it seems like it's the same failures over and over. Do you believe that we keep getting the same type of thing because we didn't learn the lesson?
Well, that's a really good question. I think there's some potential that we haven't learned the lesson. I think there's some potential that we haven't taken the time to pause to learn the lesson. I also think there's a book called The Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute. And in the book, they talk about this thesis of Dr. Cindy, something's not working. And obviously it's my fault. What in our relationship is not working? Versus I think what I've often seen in the people that you're referencing is Dr. Cindy, this isn't working. You need to do better. And so rather than me pointing the finger at you saying, well, this is all your fault, taking some sense of ownership. I hired that individual. The fact that it didn't work either a week or 6 months or 6 years in is really important. I just watched a video on Instagram. The CEO of Netflix came out and basically said, listen, I want you, all managers, to go through this exercise, all the people on your team. If you wouldn't hire them today, if you would not rehire the people on your team, you need to fire them and move on. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but the gentleman hosting this podcast, this Instagram short, said, what a brilliant idea. The idea that you can reflect on people on your team and say, hey, if I wouldn't rehire them today, 6 months, 6 years into their role, I should fire them and move on. And as I watched that video the third time, because I was sort of struck by it the first time, it was like, yeah, that makes sense. But the second and third time, I realized, well, wait a minute. If you wouldn't rehire them, is it their fault or is it your fault? Are you not giving them the tools to be successful in the role? And then if that's the case, how do you need to pivot as a manager? How do you need to pivot and give them the tools to be successful? Because listen, firing people is the worst thing ever.
Right.
Not learning from it might be slightly worse than that.
So it's interesting as I listen to you, I think, wow, this, it makes sense not only in employee employer, but really personal life, even friendships and relationships. And I think sometimes we hold on too long to people just because they showed up. Right. And sometimes we have to do this in our personal life too. Which do you
Yeah.
think is more challenging, work environment or personal environment?
Oh, I think it's a little easier to walk away from work environments. It's easier to quit your job. It's easier to go find a new job, fire an employee. I think of a great example. My ex wife, we've been divorced 20 plus years, 22, 23 years. And for the first 5 or 6 years after we got divorced, it was her fault. It was 100% her fault. She was the failure in the relationship. And had she not A, B, C, X, Y, and Z, we probably would still be married. And then at some point, I went through an exercise of really reflecting on the marriage, reflecting on the relationship from the time we started dating until after we got divorced. And what I realized is it probably wasn't 50-50, but I definitely had something to do with the failure in the marriage. I think we're more inclined in humanity today to point the finger and say it was her fault. The relationship didn't work because of her, where we're not oftentimes willing to own our piece of the working relationship or the courtship to say, hey, it didn't work because I failed her. I didn't give her all of me, and that's the reason it failed. I didn't communicate. I didn't whatever. So I think it's easier to walk away from a work environment.
I agree with you. And it's hard because that self-reflection has such a negative connotation, right? Because now it is my fault. It is my responsibility. And I believe, I look at today's society, I think we're a great society of pointing the finger. It's always somebody else's responsibility for, for everything that goes on, right? We have a scapegoat, and maybe we need to become that scapegoat on occasion,
Well, I,
right?
I mean, not to get political, but look what's happening. We're right before the election, and the left is blaming the right, and the right is blaming the left. And the reality of it is they all sit in Washington and play games with our money and like they're both the reason that we're failing as a country in many respects right now. And if they came together and said, "What could I do better to serve you, the American people, to serve you, the other side of the aisle," I think we could get through it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I agree, all the way down on a granular level. I know it's interesting. I've been divorced as well, and with somebody very special for almost a decade, and he checks in every once in a while. What can I do better for you? What do you need? And vice versa. And it's a great question to ask because it allows somebody sitting across from you the opportunity to be vulnerable enough to answer that question and not feel judged, right? Because you've opened the door. And maybe if we spent more time asking people what we could do better for them or what they need, you're right, things would definitely change. Tell me your favorite chapter of the book. What's most powerful for you? If I had to open the book to one page and read just a section, because I don't have time, which isn't really true. We make time for the things that we want, but where do I go? What do you love about parts of the book?
Wow. It's interesting because my buddy Josh, I had a handful of folks pre-read the book, beta readers in the world of writing, and I was pretty certain I had a finished copy. I was really proud of the work, and then Josh called, and in the most loving, affirming way possible, said, "Hey, the first 5 chapters I sort of slugged through, and then I got to chapter 6, and I was like, "Josh, that doesn't sound very good." He goes, "Yeah, out of obligation, I told you I'd read the book, so I read the first 5 chapters out of obligation, and then by the time I got to chapter 6, I couldn't put the book down. Eric, chapter 6 needs to be the first chapter. That's the hook. That's what draws people in." And a little begrudgingly, I moved chapter 6 to chapter 1 and basically rewrote the entire book on the backs of Josh's recommendation and a few others. And what I realized is that's the part of the book where the reader starts to recognize that they're not alone. So many of us suffer in life estranged relationships, divorces, um, miscarriage, death, suicide, whatever. And we think we're the only one going through this because we choose, for whatever reason, not to share it, or others choose not to share with us. And I think the real issue is we're not asking people how they're doing. What I mean by that is I'll ask you, "Hey, Dr. Cindy, how are you?" You'll say, "I'm great. How are you?" And I'll say, "I'm fine." And then we'll move on. But rarely do we take the time to look the other person in the eye and say, "Dr. Cindy, how are you doing today?" And then waiting and pausing and not looking at my phone and looking you in the eye and waiting for how you're really doing. The authentic, "It was a rough weekend and here's why." And I think that first chapter seems to be the one that pulls people into the rest of the book. I had a buddy call me and we were talking. I said, "Hey, did you read my book?" Because he was referencing something similar to a story in the book. He goes, I read the last chapter because I'm the read the last chapter kind of guy." I said, what a quirky thing to do. I don't think any other chapter would resonate unless you started at the beginning.
So cool. It's funny when you ask that question, how are you? It's become such a, in my mind, silly question because nobody means it.
Yep.
And I've always encouraged, my practice, I always tell patients, and you'll find most of the time when you ask me how I am, the standard good or great is never my answer because it's almost just like a general salutation now versus most of the time it's fabulous or fantastic or stressed or tired or, a little off kilter today. Or I really will answer how I am with the intent that I
Yeah.
think you actually meant it. But most people don't really mean it, right? When they ask you how you are.
Yeah.
It's
I
very
just think
sad to
it's
me.
it's a common courtesy to just say, "Hey, good morning. How are you?" "Great. I'm good. How are you?" And the reality of it is few of us are actually great.
Right. And what's fun is when you answer that question, my follow-up I love to say is, okay, what makes you fantastic today? Right?
Yeah.
Or what is stressing you out today? And it affords that opportunity then to really reach out and help somebody, I think to your point, so that they then don't feel alone. Because the good and the
Yep.
good, there's nothing to help. Right.
Yeah.
So the first chapter and the last chapter, how's that? We get into the first, we feel like we've got a family, right? A community. And in the last chapter, do you sum everything up or was your friend really disappointed because he didn't get what he needed out of the last chapter?
So the last chapter, now I'm going to cause everybody to read the book. The last chapter is a letter. It was intended to just be a letter from me to my oldest daughter, and what it ended up being is a letter from me, a letter from my wife, a letter from the kids, and letters, I should say, from a lot of her friends to her directly. But as I read those letters as her dad, as I read those letters or wrote the letter, I received it one way, but as I read the letter as a reader, I read it very differently. And so it's just been interesting to me to see how those letters in the back of the book have impacted people.
It's fun, isn't it? I always ask people what their favorite chapter of my book is. And then I always ask the why because I love the why behind the what. And it's really it's changed my world to see again what story resonates and why it resonates. And to
Yeah.
your point, very differently than my journey. It's pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah.
Now, you shared with me a story of a failure with work, and I'm going to assume that maybe wasn't your favorite because I did have a question. Do you have a favorite failure?
Well, that's a tough question. Um, wow. What's interesting is I do a lot of podcasts and I'm asked a lot of the same questions. That's not one of them. You know what? I'm gonna lean in with the first thing that came to mind, which was my failed marriage. And that seems like one hell of a failure to embrace. But the reality of it is, I got a beautiful daughter out of the deal. And the book is what it is. I am who I am in large part because at a young age I got married, at a young age I got divorced, and the lessons learned, the failing forward, the chasing failure, the opportunities to grow and learn and mature from that now 20 some odd years later is something I wouldn't change.
Mhm. Are you still learning from it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I wrote a book and the book in some part addresses that divorce. And I would say the reason it took me as long as it did to write the book is because I had to trudge through the muck a little bit. I had to address issues that I thought I had previously addressed that really were unaddressed. And it took me some time to get through some of it. And yeah, absolutely. People call me every week and tell me stories of their estranged relationship, suicide, divorce, what have you, related to the book. And I think there's always an opportunity for me to learn from it.
It's great. So, when you're not feeling enough, are there certain exercises or things that you practice that you've learned over these years that help you pull yourself out of that?
I think for me, it's the recognition of where I'm at emotionally. So I've got to start by recognizing, okay, imposter syndrome is setting in, or I'm not feeling sufficient, or I'm not feeling enough. I do at the end of most every day, I do what I call a daily examine, sort of a reflection on the day. Where did I fail? Where did I thrive? What could I do differently? How can I serve my family better? And then I do that on Friday afternoons as well on the week. And what I have found is at the end of every day and at the end of every week, even in the worst of all weeks, I've had a really overall pretty good week, or at least some highlights. As an example, right before we hit the record button, my wife sent me a text, and it's finding the little things. I write in the book, the saying, the little things mean a lot is great, and it sounds cute and it sounds perfect. The little things don't mean a lot. The little things mean everything. So, right before the podcast, we're selling the house, we're moving west about 45 minutes. And my wife sent me a text that another family had sent her, and it was a home in their neighborhood. And as silly as it sounds, it makes me feel wanted. I haven't looked at the house yet, but it makes me feel like, okay, well, if this family's willing to send us a link to a house for sale in their neighborhood, they must they must like us enough to want to be neighbors. And it's pulling those little things out to recognize that despite the bad week that we've had, there's good in everything and there's opportunities in everything.
Yeah, it's finding the gift. It's interesting, Eric. I feel like we were maybe twin brother and sister in a previous life with the way, we do some things because I do that self-reflection every day too. I don't do the Friday afternoon thing, but every night. And I love that no matter how much I feel I've screwed up or done improperly in my own head, right? Because it's all self-manifestation of what we believe
Yeah.
was the correct way to move through. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to wake up the next day and try it again and see if I
Yep.
can do it differently in a way that brings me peace at the end of the day. And it's a great exercise that I think everybody out there should try. You've mentioned imposter syndrome a couple times. For everybody listening out there who's going, what is like, can we talk about that a little bit? What does it mean for imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some formal definition. I would say for me, it's the idea that take work, which is where I think it often settles itself for most of us. This idea that we don't deserve to be in the room. As an example, I was an individual contributor at work for the first, I don't know, 5 or 10 years of my career. And then I was promoted into a managerial role. And there were definitely times I was sitting in leadership meetings thinking, I wonder if anyone else in the room recognizes that I have no right to be in this room. And it hit when I wrote the book. It hit when I became a VP and I became an entrepreneur. All these moments, these opportunities, probably the first time I was a guest on a podcast, this realization of like, hey, does Andy know that I'm not a thought leader? In fact, it was this guy, Andy Andrews, who had me on a show and introduced me as a thought leader and subject matter experts on leadership and culture. And when we ended, I said, Andy, all due respect, I am anything but. And we had a great conversation. And it was this pep talk of sorts where he's like, Eric, I've had a podcast for 3 years. You talk about leadership and culture. You've had hundreds of guests on your show. At some point, you become the thought leader. And it was really humbling, but just imposter syndrome is wondering, do my kids know that I don't know how to parent? Do my kids know that I have no idea what I'm teaching them? The reality is that you're in that situation for a reason and you deserve that at bat. You deserve the title at work. You deserve to be in the room. There's a reason you're a parent. There's a reason why you met that person. And it's just imposter syndrome is that idea that we don't deserve to be where we are.
It's interesting. And yet we're exactly where we're supposed to be.
Bingo.
Right. I've been in clinical practice for 25 years. And when I came out of school, I had that typical, syndrome of like, I know everything. I can fix the world. I can heal you. Just listen to me, right? Like just do what I tell you to do. And it's going to work. And after 25 years, it's amazing how much I still don't know, and I know way less than I knew theoretically when I came out of school 25
Yeah,
years ago, because I now recognize how much is in front of me. But I almost wonder how much that allows me to be in the room, right? And still feel confident because there really is 25 years of experience with a whole lot more in front. And it's an interesting dichotomy to go from the young, I know everything, to the older, I'll just say older, not old, the older of like, wow, humbling to know that there's still people and things and ideas out there that can really help us grow. Yeah.
absolutely.
So you're out there speaking, right? You're wowing the world, and your keynote speaking. What is your favorite audience group? Who do you love to communicate with?
Oh, we've done associations, we've done sales kickoffs, corporate events. I think the most meaningful events that I host are the ones where I hear after the fact. We talk a little bit about the book. We talk about imposter syndrome. We talk about relationship capital and the importance of us as leaders or individual contributors building relationships with the people around us, being vulnerable, having authentic conversations so we know what's going on. So when someone's not performing, it's not, hey, we're going to put you on a performance plan and work you out of the system. It's an understanding of what they're going through. So for me, the the best audiences are the ones that are the most receptive to the conversation, to the keynote presentation. And more importantly, I find a lot of fruit. I always give out my cell phone number, which sounds like a crazy thing to do. But when I start getting text messages, phone calls, emails about how people have implemented this idea of relationship capital in the workplace, that's been really rewarding for me.
Is there sort of one take home message that you love to share with people that's been, life altering for them in that role?
I think that piece on relationship capital, this idea that we have expectations that our team members are meeting KPI and metrics and financials for the business. But the reality of it is everybody we interact with, everybody, coworkers, people at Target, people at Starbucks, the server at a restaurant that just screwed up our order, everyone is going through something. And it might be the lowest of the low. The barista may have shown up to work, gotten a diagnosis for her mom that was less than favorable, but she needs the hours, so she can't leave work. That's a bad day. That barista's going through something. It might be a miscarriage, the suicide of a loved one. It might be all sorts of negative things, a foreclosure. It might be the really positive things, the buying of a new home, the pregnancy, the marriage, all of those things. But all of us going through something means that we're distracted at times. And I think it's important to recognize that distraction takes our eye off the ball that somebody wants us to be focused on. And it's just an important thing to recognize. Everyone's going through something, including the individual that just cut us off.
Right, right. It's usually about them, not about us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, and we've become sort of the society that doesn't recognize and pay attention to others in that way. I don't think, it becomes about how dare they cut me off. I'm annoyed, right?
Yeah,
Versus
absolutely.
I hope they're okay and they're not cutting me off because they do have to get to that emergency, right? And we don't think that way most of the time.
Yeah, and listen, it's okay to recognize that on occasion someone's just cutting us off. I mean, I had a guy going 95 miles an hour down the freeway this morning as I was driving home, dropping off my daughter. There's a good likelihood that might just be the way that he drives, but there might be a reason behind that. He may have been trying to get to the hospital to say goodbye to grandma or say goodbye to mom or his wife. I mean, I don't know. So rather than getting all worked up, letting our blood pressure boil, putting someone on a performance plan, getting frustrated, building that relationship capital, being in a spot where you know the cup of coffee that they drink, and once a month you have a notification on your phone to go get Julie a cup of coffee. She likes a dark roast, extra hot, a little bit of cream. And if you know that and you walk in with that cup of coffee every 4 to 6 weeks, I'm not saying get like wicked vulnerable. That's my personality type. I'm okay with it. But for those of you that are like, I really don't want to get vulnerable, just buy people a cup of coffee every now and again. If you've got one on ones with your team every week, once a month, take them out for lunch and focus on just building the relationship. And for those of you that are listening, thinking, well, everyone I do a one on one with is via Zoom because we don't go to the office, that's great. Uber Eats, have a casual meeting over Zoom eating lunch. Just get to know people, less work and more person than anything. Listen, Dr. Cindy, well, here's a great example. I was going to use buying a home. I gave a keynote presentation 5 weeks ago. It was the first virtual keynote that I had given in some time. I happened to overlap that keynote commitment with dropping my son off at his freshman year of college in Ohio. Big mistake on dad's part. Got his permission to give the keynote. I made the commitment. The university was kind enough to give me an office to give my presentation. But when I got a thank you card in the mail from the client that I delivered the keynote to, there was a gift card, which felt very strange to me. A gift card in the thank you note to Target which in the business world that I'm in, that felt, again, very strange. The gift card was for my son, wishing him well in his endeavors at college as a freshman. And I
Wow.
thought it wasn't a ton of money, but it was the effort, the relationship capital that they built with me in sending me a gift card acknowledging in part the sacrifice that I made, but more than that, the sacrifice that my son made. It was a beautiful gesture and it didn't cost them a lot and it meant the
Right.
world.
Right. And I think we get tied up in that, right? Like what do we spend versus just the art of giving in order to receive back that
Yeah.
good feeling, right? It really
Yep.
it is never about the dollar amount. And if it is,
Correct.
then we really need to self-reflect and figure out why.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my God. Great stories, great messaging. What's next for you? What's on the horizon of next projects, next fun things that you want to take over?
Well, we were out with another couple on Saturday when the book You Are Enough turned 1, and I looked at my wife at dinner and I said, "Well, I guess that means it's time for another book." So, there's another book on the horizons, but the focus for the foreseeable future is the keynote presentations. I've enjoyed the audiences, I've enjoyed the conversations, and candidly, I feel like the talk makes a difference. It makes a difference on a personal note for people, but it also makes a difference in the corporate world, in the way in which people work together, and I think that's important.
I agree. And I'll tell you what, Eric, I hope one day we share the stage and we can deliver a similar message even more powerfully together because doing it with somebody sometimes makes the journey all that more fun. All right, everybody,
Absolutely.
you are enough. So don't disappear. We're going to take another quick break to hear from our sponsors because they are still important and they are enough. We're going to do that. And then what Eric doesn't know is we're going to shoot him some rapid fire questions that he is not prepared to answer. But don't get nervous, Eric. They're super easy. And no matter how you answer them, they're going to be great and they are going to be good enough. So come right back, grab your drink, your beverage of choice, and we're going to rapid fire. See you in a minute. This is your weekly dose of Dr. Cindy, the Positively Altered podcast. Stop. Hit that follow button now and spread the love with Positively Altered. Welcome back to one of my favorite parts of the podcast because it's where I ask questions that my guest has no idea what I'm going to ask. And some of the answers are quite amusing. So let's see what happens. Eric, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's see what we got. So, first one, really simple, I think. If you could change snow from the color white to any color on the entire planet, what color would you pick?
Wow. Wow, what a wild question. I'm gonna go pink.
Pink. How come?
Because it's fun. There's not enough pink in the world. It gets everyone's attention. But like a
I love it.
neon pink, super bright.
Oh, I love it. All right. So we see it coming when it's falling out of the sky. We know whether to run or
Bingo.
stay. All right. Do you like snow?
I grew up in Phoenix. We've lived in Minnesota for 12 years. We didn't get snow much, if any, last year, and I was really disappointed. So I love the snow. I love the cold weather. I don't love when it gets frigidly cold, but generally speaking, yeah, I love the snow.
All right, great. So, Julie, we got to make a little note to send Eric some pink, hot pink dye so he can make the snow in front of his house a little bit different color than white. And I'm with you. I would change it from white too. Okay, you are in the Olympics and you could pick any sport that you are going to absolutely win a gold medal in. What sport are you going to pick?
Oh, wow. I'm going to go curling. The guys that won the curling gold in the last Winter Olympics were seemingly aesthetically pretty unathletic people. In terms of their physique, they got a lot of flack for it. They happen to be from northern Minnesota, so we heard a lot about them. I feel like I could fit into that mix, but I also think it'd be really fun to just say I won a gold medal.
No matter what sport.
Bingo.
All right. Have you ever tried curling?
Nope. It sounds like a fun thing to do this winter, though.
All right. So we need the Curling Association of America to bring us both in as a keynote speaker, and then we'll try it because I've
There it
never done it
is.
either. All right. Awesome. So, there's always this loaded question of like, if there was one person, dead or alive, that's famous that you could have lunch with, who would it be? I actually could care less about that question. I'm more interested in what the meal would be that you would choose to eat during that meeting.
Oh, I'm a filet guy. I love a good hearty steak. There's a chain restaurant, I won't name it, mostly out of embarrassment. They don't have it in Minnesota, but I used to get like an 8 or a 10-ounce blue cheese filet. There's a place here called Pittsburgh Blue. Their filet is like absolutely amazing. So I'd go filet. We'd have to have some appetizers. I'm a big dessert guy, but I'm not a chocolate guy. So for dessert, where I'm going to go, in fact, we're going to do this in Italy. So we will have gelato in Italy.
What flavor?
Oh, my wife will laugh. Strawberry and lemon.
Oh my, we were twins in another life. Although, hold on, this could break our relationship right here. What temperature do you eat the filet at?
Oh, medium.
Oh, we're close. Medium rare. All right.
Oh,
I'm going to give you a
okay.
Richter
I would
then.
do that.
Had you said, well, I would have been like, no relationship. That would have been the severance of our, yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm a strawberry girl too. I'm definitely a medium rare on the filet. This is working out really well. All right. Let's see. We got a couple more here. If you were to pick one drink you had to drink for the rest of your life, sweet, sour, or strong?
Sweet. I thought you were going to ask what it would be. Sweet, sour, or strong. I'd go sweet.
Okay. And is there a drink
Yeah.
you're thinking of?
Um, I mean, I love a glass of orange juice in the morning. I feel like that goes down. It's a nice sweet start to the day. So sour, I don't think I could handle. Strong, I do that. The Friday reflection I do is actually on LinkedIn, and I raise a glass of bourbon. So maybe if we weren't recording in the morning, the answer may have been strong.
Yeah, whiskey girl myself. See, here we go. All right, let's do one more and then my final question. If you could be an actor, a singer, or a dancer, which one?
Oh, I think I would be a singer. So when I was younger, I was singing at church, and I happened to have a really well-known Christian recording artist in front of me. And at the end of church, they looked at me and said, "You have an incredible voice." And so there's been this idea percolating for like the last 30 years that had I maybe done something with my voice, maybe there would have been something there. My 16-year-old has an incredible voice, and so I'd like to think that came from dad.
Nice, nice. And lastly, Eric, what was your favorite thing about doing the podcast today?
I love having the conversation. I love reaching new audiences and building new relationships, which is probably, I think you're going to go at some point, where can people find me, and that's where we start the relationship.
So let's do that. Where can people find you and, get the book and see you speak? Tell everybody.
Yeah, the book is anywhere you buy books, and the probably the easiest place to find me personally is on LinkedIn, but I'm on all the socials at Eric Brooker. LinkedIn is the one I spend most of my time on, and then ericbrooker.com if you want to reach out, connect with me directly. And I said this earlier, I give out my cell phone number so people can call me at 480-296-9777.
Oh my gosh, I just love it. And now I'm going to start stalking you by text too, because that's going to be fun.
Do it.
I don't do email or pick up the phone, right? I don't do those things anymore either, but definitely maybe a little poop emoji to see if you had a bowel movement that day, or a smile just so that I'm thinking about you. And we're definitely going to connect by text. So please take Eric Brooker up on that, like and follow him, because at the end of the day, we are all enough. If you need more information about me, you can find me at drsindyspeaks.com or send us an email at hello@drsindyspeaks. You know what? Today has been great because out of everything that we do and all the people we have talked to, this message is one of the most powerful, right? At the end of the day, you are enough. We are enough. And we are all here to do this thing called life, right? As Prince used to say, together. And I hope you all today have been positively altered.